In this video, I'm going to walk you through all the details of the PTR Season 5 patch notes. We're going to go through all the percentage changes on everything for the Druid. And I also am going to suggest all of the things we need to change on the Druid. We're going to put that first because we want the devs to see it. I even took the time to make mock-ups so that the devs can more easily see what we're looking for. Please like and comment on this video to help get it out there. And if you know any devs, send this to them, or at least share it to a friend. Now, I'm most excited about showing you guys this idea for a new Paragon board. But first, we should probably go up and get into some of the basics. First off is class balance. The Druid has been weak compared to top classes for multiple seasons. Most of the builds struggle with endgame content comparatively, and most of our niche builds like Stormclaw and Lacerate are lacking any kind of support. Basic skills are suffering a lot right now, and overall we just need some balance and diversity. Lucky hit chance is something that I've been struggling with for a while now. Part of the issue is that the current formula is kind of convoluted, and it makes it to where the stats you put on your gear are basically ineffective. We have skills like Boulder and Lacerate that have such low lucky hit chances that it's almost impossible to make them useful. A perfect example of this is that Lacerate lacks any kind of good AoE clear. So if you're theory crafting a build, you would go, okay, maybe I'll use lucky hit chance in order to proc some type of AoE effect, and that will help me with my clear speed, and then the Lacerate single target will hopefully be good enough for bosses. Well, not only is Lacerate underpowered when it comes to damage, but the lucky hit chance is so low that we can't do any type of AoE clearing. There's also this awkward spot where if you increase the duration of your poison skills, your lucky hit chance actually drops because it spreads the lucky hit chance into each tick of poison over the course of the duration. Companions are something that I've never really liked, and I think there's a real lack of clarity on what bonuses affect companions. I want to know that any buff I get, whether it be temporary, passive stats on gear, or anything whatsoever, is going to affect my companions the same as it affects me. Assuming, of course, that it has the correct tags for that. And tags for companions in general have not been that great. There needs to be more ways to affect the tags so we can actually scale these. I think they should have more passive power so they feel like actual companions. The wolves should deal an AoE that doesn't require having a target so that you can actually aim a circle somewhere. Or since ravens is already a circle, make the wolves charge through in a straight line or something. I think the raven should act as a utility skill, so the circle should be bigger and it should apply vulnerable to enemies the entire duration, and it should probably just have a longer duration. I think that the poison creeper should be a physical minion that actually walks around, and I think that the active ability should explode and emanate from those minions. For tempers, all recipes should only have 3 to 4 different tempers, and this is probably something you can apply to all classes because it is ridiculous when you have something that has 5+ and you brick an item before you even get the thing you want, let alone getting a high value roll. And this is definitely a 2-part problem. I think the devs should give us a way to increase the amount of tempers we can do on an item. It should probably be unlimited, but at a cost. I think that any of the duration or size tempers that are currently under weapons should move into the utility category. Utility is underutilized, and there's almost never a time that you're going to choose that over something else on a weapon. And we'll see how they address this, but unique items right now are pretty weak, especially unique weapons. So I think that all unique items should be allowed to have 1 temper. That will prevent you from having an item that is completely dead because you don't have a temper. A good example of this is the Great Staff of the Crone. I wanted to do Stormclaw build for Season 4, but because I couldn't add a temper, it put me in a really awkward spot where I couldn't choose the Great Staff of the Crone, but I also couldn't really go without one. And this is a big one that I have thought about for basically the entire time I've been playing Diablo. But for damage tags, I do not like the inconsistencies with lightning damage not counting as storm skill damage. Now, what I mean by this is not lightning storm the skill, for example. Most of these skills, or all of the skills that are lightning, are simultaneously storm skill damage, so that's not a problem. The issue comes with the different on-hit effects like Overload, Overcharge, Runeworker's Conduit, Lightning Dancer. These are all considered lightning damage, but only some of these count as storm skill damage. This ends up being really awkward when you're trying to scale something with Thunderstruck or with multiple rare nodes that are all storm skill damage. Now, I made this nice little mock-up to try and represent the different damages on Druid so that the devs can more easily see where these damages are and what is out of place. So the cool thing about Druid is that Druid is very much a yin-yang type of class. We have shapeshifting, and on 2 sides of shapeshifting we have werebear and werewolf. Then we have nature magic. Right now nature magic is combined, but I believe that adds some confusion. So if it was just nature would affect earth and storm, and then you have synergies between werebear and earth, and werebear and overpower and earth and overpower, and you have synergies between werewolf and storm, and both of these and poison. Then you have 2 separate things, magic damage and physical damage. It becomes very confusing on Druid because you have things like earth skills that deal nature magic damage, but then those are also physical damage. But then you have something like lightning storm that is nature magic damage, but also magic damage. But they don't say magic damage, they only indicate physical damage. You see what I'm getting at? And then you also have lightning, which ends up being storm damage, but it's just an extra step and it convolutes the whole thing. So if they were trying to simplify it, this is what I think they should have. The shape-shifting and nature, magic and physical, werebear and werewolf, and earth and storm. Now, one more thing when it comes to damage tags that really bugs me with Druid is that right now, the lightning strikes from Cataclysm and Lightning Storm are treated differently than lightning bolts from Bad Omen and Runeworker's Conduit. It makes it really awkward and confusing for most players, and it just makes synergizing a lightning build much more difficult than it should be. And the devs shouldn't be afraid to fix any of these problems, because as Ace has said in the past, we are 34 times weaker than the average barbarian. 34 times weaker. Now I've got some suggestions for Paragon board changes, and then I've also got a couple Paragon boards that I think should be made for the Druid. The good news is I think a lot of these changes could be done relatively easily because they're mostly just number tweaks. So for Ancestral Guidance, right now after spending Spirit you deal increased damage. I think that the damage should increase based off of your max Spirit. First off, this adds a synergy that I think is completely lacking on the Druid, which is max Spirit doesn't really benefit you on almost anything you do. I think the only thing I can think of is Earth and Might, because you're going to fill your Spirit and it's going to fill to a higher number. Second, it synergizes with the actual board that it's on, which has 2 different rare nodes that give you max Spirit. It also prevents the anti-synergistic nature of doing resource cost reduction, which is something you always want to do when you're using a core skill build, with needing to spend a certain amount of Spirit. It doesn't make sense. Next up, we've got Constricting Tendrils. For Constricting Tendrils, I basically just want to change this to where it's not a lucky hit. Just let us poison enemies with nature magic skills. There's an awkward hole in earth skills where they can't really poison enemies, and sure, it may not synergize with poison as much as normal, but poison is an important utility that basically every build wants to have. So for investing into an out of the way Paragon node, I think that being able to poison enemies right away is perfectly fine. We don't need to have a bunch of damage on this. We just need to be able to reliably poison enemies. Next up, we've got Hide and Malice. It currently is for when there's 3 or more poison enemies nearby, we deal 45% multiplicative damage. What I'm proposing is that we change this to probably a slightly lower number, and then allow this to always apply to poison bosses. It's just such an awkward out of the way Paragon node, and it feels really bad that you can't even apply this to bosses most of the time. For Survival Instincts, I feel like this one is just a little bit of a weird one because it requires your HP to be different than the enemies, and if you're using something like Pulverize, which is the best werebear skill currently, then you're likely trying to kill enemies in the first hit, and if you're at full health and they're at full health, then you're not getting that damage increase. So my proposal is to make this similar to Retaliation, where we're going to deal 1% increased damage for every 3% that we are fortified. That means that at our max, we're going to get about 33.3%, but we can just cap this at 33% to simplify it. Now I've got a couple of Paragon boards that I want to be made. This might take a little bit more work from the devs, but I really think this would go a long way to making Druid a class that people actually want to play. So I'll start with the most important one first, and that is Violent Mutation. That's just a placeholder name. This one will have 4 different legendary nodes on the board, and it will help remove the gridlock of Vasili's Prayer or Tempest's Roar while introducing new options. So let me show you the mock-up on this. As you can see, we've got the glyph in the middle, and in the top left, top right, bottom left, and bottom right, we have legendary nodes. Now with the way it's designed, the werebear skills are now earth skills, and the earth skills are now werebear skills, are closer together because those synergize together. They're still far enough away from each other that if you're trying to get both for a build for whatever reason, it's still going to cost you a bit, but it gives you the option and opens up the possibilities. That's what we want. We don't need the most broken thing ever. We need possibilities. On the other side, you've got werewolf skills are now storm skills, and storm skills are now werewolf skills. Now, typically, it is better to focus into one thing when you're playing a build, so there's almost no chance that you would ever want to grab more than 2 of these, at least at the same time. But I think this is very important for the Druid. Now, you can still have items like Tempest Roar and Vasilis, because you may not want the other stuff on this board, or it may be too much of a Paragon point commitment, so you end up going with the item. But if they really wanted to, they could just change the unique items. But right now, it feels really bad on Druid because uber unique helmets are actually one of the best items that you can get, but almost every single storm build wants to have Tempest Roar. So why not open it up and allow us more options? Then for the other 2 Paragon boards that I had in mind, I have Vicious Rampage, which is basic skills deal 20% of your attack speed as multiplicative damage up to 50%. Now, the reason I say 50% here is because I feel like basic skills need a bigger boost, but if they were to buff the base amount of basic skills, they wouldn't need to put this so much higher. And I think that the rare nodes near the glyph here should be attack speed and maximum life to help synergize with basic skills. The other one I had in mind is Human Ingenuity. For this one, deal 10% increased damage for each second that you remain in human form up to 50%. Typically, if you're playing a human build, you're not going to be doing a lot of shape-shifting, so this allows you to have a nice bonus if you're not changing your form as often. It also promotes staying in human form and playing into that class fantasy. And for the rare nodes here, I suggested going for human damage reduction and resource cost reduction while human, or you could also do movement speed while human, basically just to try and plug some of those holes that being in human form ends up being worse than a lot of other stuff most of the time. Now, the fact that they're nerfing the Shepherd's aspect in the upcoming PTR changes shows that the devs are actually listening and trying to change to benefit the players. But let's go through all of the changes specifically and see what all they've done. So first off, a few honorable mentions. Grizzly Rage randomly got a nerf. It was kind of a buff nerf, but mostly a nerf. It's practically unusable with what I read. This is interesting because not only has Grizzly Rage been nerfed extremely hard previously and nobody was using it, but it's also consistently been glitched in different ways. So they really need to figure out what they're doing with Grizzly Rage and take it out of the dumpster. It's possible that they did this because they're fixing the glitches finally, so we'll see what happens with that, but I still don't know if it's going to be worth using. The Earthen Bulwark buff is huge. The survivability on this is going to be insane because they're changing it from base life to maximum life. With the amount of maximum life we can stack in the game now, it's not only insane survivability, but it might bring back bulwark builds from the past, or at least a variation on that. We got new weapons we can use as Druid, which is kind of cool. Lacerate got a quality of life improvement, and Lupin Ferocity got a nice buff. Lupin Ferocity only takes 3 hits instead of 6 now in order to get the bonus damage, so it's actually pretty good. The Shepherd's nerf, obviously. It no longer applies to core and wrath skills, it only applies to companion skills. Unfortunate for Hurricane, because it was pretty useful with Hurricane. We got multiple passive damage reduction buffs, and Debilitating Roar was nerfed from 70 to 40. Overall, this ends up equalizing pretty well, and most builds are actually getting a buff, because Debilitating Roar is really good, but I didn't always use it. Thunderstruck got nerfed pretty hard. People were getting over 150% multiplicative damage before, now it's capped at 40. And Erida's Inexorable Will got nerfed so that the range doesn't go further than intended, but this was actually kind of a nice feature for the ring, and hopefully they fix this and put it back. Or I guess I should say, I hope they break this and put it back. Alright, now for all of the main skills that were changed, I put the exact percentages of the changes, but I wanted to include Claw and Stormstrike here, because I love Stormclaw, and with the changes that happened, this got a 27% nerf, while everything else got a buff pretty much. And considering Stormclaw already got hurt by not being able to have tempers with the Crone staff, and this build is no longer a possibility. So we'll see if they offer any changes to compensate for this, but they really need to do something better for Stormclaw. Man, Stormclaw is just struggling right now. So the big thing is Landslide. Landslide got a huge buff. So with my math here, you can see that what they showed is a 300% increase, which is 4 times of what it was previously. But if you consider the Shepherd's nerf and putting a replacement aspect, it's going to be about 120% to 150% increase, which is still huge. Landslide was not a bad build previously, and now it's just going to be extremely strong. For Shred, all in all, it ends up being a 35 to 42% increase. Hurricane ends up being a 34 to 42% increase. But with the Thunderstruck nerf, it's actually only about a 10% increase. Pulverize is a 35 to 42% increase. Tornado ends up being about a 10% increase. Lightning Storm ends up being about a 10% increase. Cataclysm ends up being almost unchanged if you use the additional aspect as well. Of course, this isn't taking into effect that the lightning strike rate is doubled and the lightning actually tries to target the enemies. So overall, Cataclysm did get a pretty solid buff. There was also a mention of attack speed being able to affect Lightning Storm now, which means Lightning Storm could actually scale extremely powerfully. So I guess the thing I'll leave you guys on is which builds I think are going to be best next season. Based off of this, we'll see what changes they make in the PTR. So once again, Stormclaw, dead in the water. Landslide, probably the king. Shred, I don't think it's really going to shine because it's already in a place that's not as good as other builds, but we'll see what they do. Hurricane, I think it got a pretty bad quality of life change by not being able to be affected by shepherds, because shepherds synergized with clarity, which was a companion skill, or passive I should say. So it's a little bit awkward for Hurricane, but should still be strong despite the clunkiness of the build. For Pulverize, it should be a pretty good increase. It's already doing pretty well this season, and this is just a straight buff, so it should be a solid choice. Tornado, this might be the first season where Tornado is not at the top with other builds, but it's still pretty strong. And a 10% buff is still a 10% buff. Lightning Storm, with the 10% buff and the potential attack speed thing, it might actually surpass Tornado finally. It kind of did pass Tornado in Season 3, but it wasn't a pass in DPS. In Season 3, Tornado was still doing more DPS, but Lightning Storm was just better overall. Now with the attack speed changes, it might be possible that Lightning Storm could overtake Tornado in DPS as well. Cataclysm looks like it'll be a nice addition to Lightning builds. I might use this as my way to fix Stormclaw for Season 5 in order to allow it to still be viable, but that means we're going to be taking the damage out of the basic attacks, and it's going to be purely on hit effects. But I think that's all I've got for this video. I hope you guys liked the video. I hope you agreed with it. If you don't agree, make sure you leave a comment and let me know what you think. And just in general, like the video and comment so we can get this out to the devs. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Daddy Druid out.
What do you got against Stormclaw, huh?